Hello there, fellow human beings. This is Mandian Astral Oracles, and friend of the show, Natalie, actually asked me to include this topic in Sunday's live stream, and then I posted it in the Zoom chat, and I forgot to check whether or not it was still there when we began a few days later, and it wasn't. But I assume there's some divine timing in this, and what she would like to get some advice on, and I think this is probably generally helpful to all of us, is the topic of self-acceptance and self-responsibility in being true to ourselves and to other fellow human beings. So I think this is a very beautiful topic, and what I'm sensing, it's interesting because what I'm sensing is happening generally to us is like I'm experiencing a lot of anger and have been experiencing a lot of anger, and now it seems to move into a more helpful place. But I can sense that there's been a lot of distraught emotion moving through people, and what's sort of happening is it's the divine Father coming home. So, I think probably, and you can play around with this perspective, our individual responses to the whole COVID situation has been very much determined on how we view our mother figures. And now it seems that this is sort of being corrected or corresponded by the father figure. That's the limiting figure, and it's of course in many ways also the angry giant, the loving mother and the angry giant, but it's also um, the all-consuming. To move them around in polarities, it's also like the all-consuming mother, or the enmeshing mother, and of course the benign king, or the rule-making father. So there are like these aspects in it, and I assume it's in divine timing that I return to these topics at this moment, and therefore I also feel it won't be the Archangel Raphael, it will be the Archangel Gabriel, that guy who's kind of the voice of the Father deity, and who sometimes appears to people to say, oh, you're going to give birth to a child, or you're sitting out in the desert, and he appears in the cave and goes, recite, and all of a sudden the Quran springs forward, right? So those are those are some of his qualities, the divine messenger, and what's not to like about that guy. So again, the topic will be on self-acceptance and self-responsibility and staying true to ourselves and to others, and just notice again like this symbolic idea of staying true to yourself. In Hamlet, it's Polonius instructs Laertes as he's about to return to Paris to study. Of course, the most famous saying in that the wisdom he imparts on him is, and above all else, to thy own self be true. So this question of being true to ourselves is really coming into the forefront these days. So thank you for being here, and I hope you take something positive from it. Yes, this is the Archangel Gabriel addressing you this day to impart wisdom on you from the heavens about these ideas. How do you accept yourself, and how do you assume responsibility for yourself? How do you discern what is true within yourself, and how do you relate this to your relationship to others? So how do you also, as a consequence, recognize and deal with what is true within others? See, let us divide this into four elements, as it is essentially four questions that are gathered in this one topic of indeed authenticity, we could call it. Another word would be truth, though then authenticity perhaps speaks to a greater degree of personal truth and personal autonomy, while the idea of truth is that there is something universal that you should align with. And indeed, there is nothing universal that you should align with. There are certain rules, regulations, and parameters that are set up for human experience in order for it to play out meaningfully. But often what happens is that you will turn your back on these or revert from these when they are imposed upon you, because all of you need to discover that truth as something that's personally revealed to you. And that revelation, it might sometimes take the place as something that's stimulated or invoked by receiving an outside message such as this from the heavens, but indeed it is something that you need to come into, and that is the idea of self-acceptance. That is the idea that, well, all these strivings, even the strivings for being responsible, for being kind and loving to other people, well, as long as they are sort of being imposed upon you by outside or limiting factors, or even internal factors, that is, disparate parts of you which you have made greater than other parts. So, to stay in a terminology that many people may be familiar with, the idea that, well, I should be accepting myself is a super ego idea that of course implies the idea that there are parts of myself that I don't accept. And so the paradox here, of course, is that if you relinquish this need to accept yourself, you will actually experience the flow of who and what you actually are as something that is naturally pouring forward within you. And there has been this idea, which is a very super ego idea. And notice again, as our friend here was saying, that the super ego is in many ways connected to the Divine Father. Of course, I would like you to know that I represent the Divine Source, not the Divine Father, and this force is as much feminine as it is masculine. Actually, we would say that the feminine energy, though it does not make up a greater part of the cosmos, of the all, than the masculine energy, being, well, two ways to divide what is one whole, then it is, well, the primary energy. And so you may know that life force and pure positive vibration, before it is interpreted, before it is limited, and before it is brought into form, which is what you may construe as the yin energy or the feminine energy of the all, then that is in a sense also benevolent. And that means that, well, it's helpful, of course, to redirect this pure energy, this unbound and shapeless energy, into something with the limiting force of your consciousness, of your will and your intention. And this is indeed the meeting of the masculine and the feminine within the human heart. This is indeed the meaning of the upper masculine senses with the lower feminine senses. There not being a value hierarchy implied in this, but simply the fact that these are the earthy energies of pure uninterpreted flow, and these are the heavenly energies of restriction and discernment, both forces being necessary. And so, can you trust this dance within yourself? Can you trust that this is actually the acceptance that you need to move into? It's the fact that often you will be fed a lot of impulses that are required to be brought out through you, and that may, to your sense of responsibility, to your sense of restriction, may seem like they are a bit too much, like these are things that you shouldn't be experiencing or you shouldn't be expressing. But are you really hurting anyone? Are you trusting, speaking of the truth within yourself, are you trusting that other people can handle the same amount of life experience that you can? Or are you doing this thing which is so common among your species that you think you should be the one bearing the cross and suffering for all others, that you should be the one that should care for others, that should try to limit your own truth in order for them to, well, feel coddled or protected or not hurt by your own process? Or do you have a trust that if your honesty begins to flow, your personal truth begins to flow, it will begin to resonate with those parts in others. So when you assume responsibility for yourself first. Actually, only assume responsibility for yourself, and know that when you assume responsibility for yourself in the truest way, this doesn't mean restricting yourself. This doesn't mean imposing bonds or sacrifices or martyrdom upon yourself. It means actually allowing for those the most healthy, the most sustainable, the most nourishing parts within you to be actually nourished by that more super ego force within you, to be allowed to flow forward, to let life force seed in your heart. And with that comes a great degree of acceptance. And that acceptance, it acts both as a permission to others for them to also go into that heart space and to find themselves. And it also acts as a repellent towards others who may not have your best interests at heart or are witnessing that you are the type of person who who is willing to violate themselves in order for them to feel good. So truth is always a personal interpretation, and yet it is what you cultivate together as those most serene parts within you. Remember that even though you may think of your soul as an individual soul, the human soul is essentially one soul, and that soul is a universal part of the all. So there is complete identity with the will of the cosmos, with the will of Source, with the will of God, indeed, if that is the word that you still prefer to use, and with your true will, with the true allowance and self acceptance of who you actually are, and with the true allowance of other people and who they may actually be. So when you limit yourself, you are essentially also limiting other people. And it may seem like you are doing them a great service, but indeed it is a disservice to those truest parts within you. So what you are being asked to is to really trust yourself. Above all else, to thine own self be true. To know that you will be guided towards what is the best, the most serene, the highest purpose for your own unfolding, for the path you have chosen down here. And also know that this may not seem very harmonious, just as very fascinating pieces of music or great and complex narratives or, well, paintings that are difficult to take in their grandeur of vision. They often contain a lot of elements that would separately seem not very pleasing, but in their totality are very grand and very wonderful. So if we were to, for instance, point to, for instance, yes, the Judgment Day in the Sistine Chapel, this very grand and very famous painting. Well, if you were to just look at the hellish parts of that, would it not instill you with fear? But notice that there's a balance within this, as in this vision, as well as there is a balance in the vision that Source indeed has for you, and that Source indeed is the highest part of you, the part that allows you to carry out your will. And just as you know that if you were to stop a movie in the middle, there you would see that, well, maybe the hero or the heroine were just caught in trouble and that was the end of it. So you need to play it out to the end to really understand the harmony of what was going on here. Or if you step too close to a Monet and you begin to analyze the disparate parts, you of course only see those messy blotches of paint that sort of seem haphazardly arranged. But when you step back to the higher perspective, you see the truth of this, you see the beatific vision in this, and allow yourself to see the beatific vision in all the missteps and all the false notes and all the, the apparently cul-de-sacs you have walked down in your life. Try to realize that these were also parts of a grand maze that makes up a wonderful puzzle, and it's this puzzle that you're solving. It's the puzzle of you, and this is indeed the place where you assume responsibility for yourself, that you accept yourself. It is to not try to edit some parts out of yourself and then try to find others, and it is not to then, what you will inevitably do when you do that is then you will begin to also edit others into that picture. You will begin to, benevolent as it may be, also use them to prove your own stories about yourself. So know that the story is secondary, and the truth of you is simply an experience that is always going on and always perfect, even though it might be in a place where it has a hard time seeing the totality of what is going on. I would like to impart this message on you. We sense it has served some of you, and know that the guidance of the angels and the heavens, they are always available to you when you tune into your heart. This heart space is opening both for you individually and for the greater collective as a whole, and as it does, many strange pangs of emotion will rush forward, but these will all serve for you to come in to your totality of being. Much love and many blessings from both the earth and the heavens. I bring to you the Archangel Gabriel. Peace.